Man, I got my Steelers gear on, my Play Renegade hat, my Still City shirt, but it's not Steelers time. I gotta change hats because this is almost like the Super Bowl, but for the stock market. And that's NVDA earnings coming up this Wednesday, August 28th. The most important moment in the stock market since last Friday when Jerome Powell spoke. But in today's Courage Pays Better Than Fear Mini, I'm going to preview the earnings, talk about what potentially we could see, and I'm excited to share that all with you here on Courage Pays Better Than Fear. So this is a very unique time that we're having NVIDIA earnings because we hit all-time highs not too long ago in July on the Qs, on the SPX. And if you just go back to the last earnings call for NVIDIA, they had the 10-to-1 split. They broke 1,000. Now they have since split, and we had the flash crash. It came down to $90. And Jerome Powell spoke last week. Things were very dovish. We're getting rate cuts in September. And the question is are we going to continue to push higher? And no pressure at all, NVIDIA, but it's all on you in terms of where this thing is going. So what we're going to do in today's video is take a look at what are the possibilities, potentialities for NVIDIA over earnings and whether or not it can continue to climb higher. And there's always the bear camp who says, oh, it's going to come down. It's got to correct. It's got to drop. And that's true. But if there's one stock that it's very, very difficult to go against and to be bearish against, it's NVIDIA because they continually show up. And this little thing called artificial intelligence, the fourth industrial revolution, it's just getting started. And so let's let the charts be our guide. Let's take a look at what they're saying and get an idea and generate some concepts for what can transpire this coming Wednesday. So let's pull up NVIDIA here on our trading view. And I'm going to start with the longer time frames and then we'll work backwards from there. But I wanted to start on the monthly and look at that candle. That is a hammer if I've ever seen one. And so that obviously we know is very bullish when you have a hammer candle, and especially one so pristine, so textbook is that. And you could see here the black line on my screen. That's the 10 exponential moving average on the monthly. And it dropped down here. We could see when we had that little crash off of fears of recession, the high unemployment number, we got down to about 90.87 pre-market. But then since that moment, it's just been getting bought up. And so we've seen buyers come in to scoop up NVIDIA. You can see a buy area that I have marked here on my screen. But that's a bullish looking candle on the monthly chart. Let's head over to the weekly and see what we're looking at here. And right away, what jumps out is you see the all-time high that was made following the last earnings on the week of May 20th. And from there, it pulled back, pushed back higher, didn't touch all-time highs, created a little double top pattern, confirmed it when that neckline was closed below, dropped, and then pushed back higher. And what's been established really is this inability to reclaim all-time highs. And there's a bit of a upper trend line resistance that I'll show you here on the daily chart in a second. But going from that monthly down to the weekly view, we could see that we do have a bit of a bearish formation shaping up here. This almost looks like a triple top, double top, however you want to spell it out. But what I would say is these last 3 weeks prior to today's Monday, very bullish. This could just be a little resting pattern before going higher. But let's continue to drill down. Let's go over to the daily. And here we go. We could see that all-time high that was made on June 20th, a couple weeks after earnings. And then NVIDIA made another push on July 11th, got up to a high of around 136. And then from there, that's where the drop really started. This day here being when everything sold off on that Monday. That's the fears of the Japan carry trade coming to roost, the unemployment fears, all those things. But since then, it got bought back up, and it almost got down to that 200 SMA on the daily. It got below the 100 for the first time. Geez, you have to go back quite a ways. October of last year, the last time it was below the 100. And what happened? It got bought up. And as we sit here today, this day isn't over yet. We are above the 10 EMA. We're above all the moving averages. You could see the 50 here, the 100 here, the 200 here. And we're kind of moving, we're just moving sideways, right? And in terms of a resistance above us, we obviously have that all-time high. And if we draw out a trend line from this all-time high to where we are right now, and I'll change this to a green color, I'll make it a little bit thicker, we can see we do have a bit of an upper trend line resistance here. Again, when I'm looking at resistance support, I'm looking at a range, not necessarily an exact price. You can see here that this almost touched that trend line. And so what I'm looking for is a close above this to get some type of confirmation that we can push higher, that we are making new recent highs. Because what this says to me is we have a higher high here, a lower high, and now we have another lower high. So we need to start taking out some of these lower highs that we've established from recent time last week, and then going back to July 11th. And if we could do that, then there's an opportunity for this thing to push. And so what does that mean for earnings for NVIDIA? So let's just go take a look at the last few earnings that we had. This will be the first earnings that we have for NVIDIA post-split. But you can see here, May 22nd, we were kind of moving sideways. And what happened from here? We gapped up, right? And that's when we broke $1,000. That's the first time NVIDIA broke $1,000 on that gap up on earnings. You can see all that bull volume that came in and it pushed to all-time highs. So that was a beautiful move. But notice, let's just look at this sideways movement here, right? And if we come look at where we are right now, we got some sideways movement as well. So similar type pattern above the 10, above all the moving averages, kind of just moving sideways. And this was coming off of a little bit of a dip from I guess you could call it a correction back in April. It wasn't much of a correction. This is a decent sized correction here, but some similarities to last time that we had earnings. And so we pushed higher, and from that close, the day of earnings to the high, it went up 48%. Okay. So we gapped up previous earnings. Let's go back to February's earnings. So we pulled down into the 20. We were climbing higher. This was that big, crazy run that we had January and February, really continued into March. And then what happened here? This thing gapped up and pushed within how many days? 10 days, 11 days. It pushed up 46%, right? So the last two times that NVIDIA has reported earnings, it has moved significantly higher. Okay, so it's been 2 for 2 in terms of big moves on earnings. So now let's go back to December. All right, here was December. And coming into this earnings report here, we'd bottomed out and we were pushing higher, pushing higher. And you could say that's a little bit of a double top pattern. And on earnings, what happened? It gapped down, right? And sold off. So it pushed higher into earnings. People were buying it up, and then it sold off. So it was a type of buy the rumor, sell the news type of event, sold down into the 100 and the 50, and then it started its leg up into January. So that was December of 2023. So let's go to August of last year. So similar type of conditions, same month, same seasonality. August is one of the worst months for the stock market, as is September. So let's take a look at what happened last August. So we were in a bit of a correction last August. We were in a bull market. It pulled down into earnings. And then it started to get bought up, and then it did gap up the next day. It did move up higher, but then what happened? It sold off. So all those gains that it made, it faded back down. So that could be a scenario that we see tomorrow, that it pushes, or excuse me, Wednesday, that it pushes higher. The price action does increase, but what happens is you have a lot of people being cautious, being protective, defensive. They're taking profits, and this thing sells down. And you can see that it pushed up again before selling off, coming back down into the 100. So, if we just look at, and one thing to point out too is NVIDIA's beat earnings expectations every time. So it doesn't matter, even if they report a beat on revenues and earnings per share, it doesn't matter. There's also the forward guidance that market makers are going to look at. But everything could be perfect with whatever the market makers want to do, they're going to do it. And so it goes without saying that more than likely they're going to beat whatever the expectations were that they've laid out. Okay. And then if you go back before then, that was the May 2023 earnings report, where that was really the big gap up that just sent this thing to where it is now. And so, if we just count, and we'll go back to February of 2023, gap up. In May of 2023, gap up. In August of 2023, we did gap up, but then we faded. December, we got bought up into earnings and then sold off. In February of this year, gap up. In May of this year, gap up. So you could see that NVIDIA typically gaps up. The only exceptions to that, we have to go to August of last year, where it did gap up, but then sold off the next day. And then if you go look at December, it got bought up leading into earnings. And then what did it do? It sold off on earnings. Okay. So there's a lot of things to take into account here, in terms of what could happen, and also just looking at the overall market in terms of where we are. We are overall bullish. And if we look at the SPX right now, you could see that we're close to all-time highs. We're pushing back up to all-time highs after we had that correction. This is about 9.73% on the S&P 500. The Q's almost corrected 16%. And so there is a chance that NVIDIA could gap up and go higher. There's always that possibility. But if you think in terms of seasonality, September is one of the weaker months for the market. NVIDIA has been pumping pretty hard. Whatever NVIDIA does, it's going to lead the way for the markets. So if it gaps down, or if it just moves sideways, then that's going to be bearish for the market. It's got to be a strong move. And when I was principal, there used to be the saying that if a principal sneezes, the entire school catches a cold. Well, if NVIDIA sneezes, the entire stock market is going to get COVID. So it's going to drive whatever happens. Now, what do I think is most likely to play out this Wednesday with this earnings call? Again, I hate going against NVIDIA because it is so strong, and every time you think that it can't push higher, it does. And so I would not recommend shorting this. I would not recommend buying puts. I would not recommend playing earnings on this thing at all. You got to be pretty brave to do that. I know I'm not going to. Again, I'm a long-term shareholder. I bought shares after the split that I'm sitting on for 10 years. But how do I see this playing out? Well, I think there's a couple things. We could look at the bull case, the bear case, the sideways case. And what I'm going to go with is something similar that happened last August. So I'll just go back over here to August of last year right here. And we did look at this just a bit ago, where it did gap up, but then it sold off. All right. And so that was the first time that NVIDIA had hit 500. That was in post-market that time. And so I could see something similar to this. And so I could see a nice push higher. They're going to have a great report. I think you're going to see a push in all chips as a result of this, the whole chip sector. But then I think you're going to see some weakness coming the next day, people being defensive, taking profits. So that's what I'm seeing. And what I think will eventually happen is we are going to get another correction on NVIDIA, but this time it'll be, I don't want to say as pronounced, but it's going to chop around a bit down here near this 200. And you can see I have this line marked out at 78 where I would love to add to my position. And if it gets there, I will definitely be a buyer. And so if this does pop on earnings, um, I think it will eventually come back down. I think everything has got one more correction in it before we begin the next true leg up in this bull cycle. So I think the most likely thing, NVIDIA does push higher. It does gap up into that next day, but then it sells off because you have people being defensive, locking in their gains, and then maybe positioning themselves in other beat up equities for the move forward. Okay. So I would say that's the middle of the road case. The bull case for this thing, I mean, if this moves sideways that we're having right now is similar to what we saw back here before the gap up on last earnings, 150's on the table, 155, 160. So that would be very, very bullish. And what would have to happen here is NVIDIA would have to absolutely hang the moon in terms of its revenue, earnings per share, forward guidance. That we would want to see an increase in demand for their chips, which the demand is already off the charts. And so if that happens and they do that, then between 150 to 160, I think is a reality for this stock. So that's the bull case, and everything has to go right. And then the bear case, let's say that they miss, which that would not be a good thing for NVIDIA. The market makers expect perfection from NVIDIA, and it's unfair, but it's just the way it is. And if they're not perfect, if they miss in one of the areas, earnings per share, revenue, forward guidance, then you're going to see this sell off quite hard. And the last time that we saw a drop on earnings, and it wasn't a massive drop, but that was December of 2023. Again, it pushed up in earnings and then it gapped down. It wasn't a huge gap down. And this is back when it was in the 400s, 500s. But we could have a decent gap down. And again, that's where we have to use our moving averages to get a feel for where it could drop to. And the 50 SMA, I think, would be too kind. I think it would come lower to that. The first stop would definitely be that 100 SMA on the daily. And then I think over time, what you would see is just some consolidation and then a slow grind downward into the 200 to where, we'd have buyers coming in and setting up for that next leg higher. And the last thing I want to pull up here is just the volume profile here on the daily chart. And you can see there's quite a bit of support here on NVIDIA in these areas. And it's really this 114 area that if it pushes through, then it could come down into that 108 area. But if it gets through 108, then it's going to come down pretty easily because it's thin through here down into 94. And then if it can clear that, it's just the 200 to hold it up. Okay, so just my thoughts here on what I think is going to happen with NVIDIA. So here is just to put it on the chart. I think it's going to push up. I think maybe we do poke our head over that all-time high. Maybe we get up into the 148s. And then that next day around market open, what you're going to see is people taking profit, locking in their gains, and this thing starts to come down. And then it's a slow grind lower, some consolidation around those simple moving averages, the 100 and 200 over time. The whole market corrects, settles, and then we begin our next leg higher up. So that's just how I see it. It's going to be fun regardless of how it plays out. And don't forget, that's Wednesday at market close. I believe it's 4:15. It's going to be a lot of fun, so be sure to check that out. And Let me know your thoughts. Put in the comments what you see happening for NVIDIA earnings. Again, I'm going to go with 148. We do gap up, sells off, it fades that next day, and that signals the start of a real correction, not just a 10%er. We're going to get a real correction. We need one to keep this bull market healthy. So let me know in the thoughts what you guys think. Take care, and I'll see you back here for another Courage Pays Better Than Fear mini when NVIDIA reports in December. Have a great one, everybody. Take care.